I'm Julian, I'm 30 years old, and I've spent the last decade being the disappointment of the family. While my brother was closing real estate deals and driving Porsches, he was buried in a basement lab, broke and exhausted. He invited them to the single most...
Wyatt looked up, a smirk instantly forming on his face. Well, look who emerged from the cave. Did you run out of ramen noodles, Jules? Good to see you too, Wyatt, I said, ignoring the jab. I clutched the envelope in my hand tighter. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock. I had paid extra for the printing. It mattered to me. What do you want, Julian? Dad asked. He still hadn't looked up from the iPad. I have a call with the zoning commission in 10 minutes. Make it quick. I took a breath. I came to give you this. I walked over and placed the envelope on the glass table between them. Wyatt picked it up like it might be contaminated. He flipped it over, reading the embossed text. The National Biomedical Research Symposium? Wyatt read aloud, putting on a mock-serious voice. Sounds thrilling. Will there be clowns? Or just test tubes? It's this Friday, I said, looking at my father. I'm presenting my findings. It's big, Dad. I've been working on this for 5 years. It's the final phase of the clinical trials. I really want you both to be there. Dad finally lowered the iPad. He looked at the invitation, then at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. He looked at me the way he looked at a property that wasn't generating enough rental income. Friday? Dad asked. Friday is the Sterling Invitational. My heart sank. The golf tournament? Not just a tournament, Julian, Dad snapped. It's a networking goldmine. Mr. Sterling is going to be there. You know who Sterling is, don't you? Or do you live so far under a rock you don't know the biggest tech investor on the East Coast? I know who he is, I said quietly. We have a tea time right behind his group, Wyatt added, tossing the invitation back onto the table. It slid across the glass and fell onto the floor. We're closing the downtown redevelopment deal. That's a $40 million contract, Jules. That's real money. Not grant money. Real money. I understand it's business, I said, bending down to pick up the invitation. But this presentation is at 4 p.m. You'll be done with golf by then. It's only 20 minutes from the club. Dad sighed, a long, heavy exhale that signaled his patience was gone. Julian, look at you. You're 30 years old. You're driving a car that sounds like a lawnmower. You're wearing a suit that looks like you bought it at a thrift store. And you want us to skip cocktails with a billionaire to watch you talk about. What is it this time? Mice. It's not just mice, Dad. It's a neurodegenerative treatment protocol. It could change everything for people who are sick. Dad cut me off. There are always sick people, Julian. And there are always doctors. But there is only one Sterling deal. You need to grow up. You need to stop playing scientist and start thinking about your future. Do you think your inheritance is going to last forever? Oh wait, I forgot. You don't have one anymore. The air left the room. What? I whispered. You heard me, Dad said, turning back to the window. I'm updating the trust. Wyatt is taking over the firm. You've got your degree. That's what you wanted, right? You wanted to save the world. Go save it. But don't expect me to pay for it. I looked at Wyatt. He was grinning, wiping a speck of dust off his 9-iron. He knew. He had probably helped Dad draft the paperwork. It's for your own good, little brother, Wyatt said. Sink or swim. That's how the real world works. Maybe if you sold something people actually wanted to buy, you wouldn't be begging us to come to your little science fair. It's not a science fair, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and humiliation. It's a medical breakthrough. Nobody cares about your lab rats, Julian, Dad shouted, slamming his hand on the windowsill. Nobody. Does it pay the mortgage? Does it buy a membership at the club? No. It drains money. You are a drain, Julian. Now get out. We have to prep for Friday. I stood there for a moment, the silence ringing in my ears. I looked at the father who had never once said he was proud of me. I looked at the brother who had spent his life stepping on me to feel taller. I nodded. Slowly. Okay, I said. I understand. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I simply turned around and walked out. As I reached the door, I heard Wyatt laugh. Hey, if you need cash for gas on the way home, check the couch cushions. I think I dropped a few quarters. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, shutting off the sound of their laughter. I walked to my car, got in, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Elena, my research partner. It's confirmed. The FDA panel just cleared the data. We are a go for the announcement. It's 100% effective, Julian. We did it. I looked at the text. Then I looked back at the house. They had no idea. They thought they were the kings of the world because they were chasing a billionaire on a golf course. They didn't know that the world was about to change. And they didn't know that the useless son was holding the match that would light the fire. I put the car in gear. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I drove away, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. As I drove away from the estate, heading back toward the city and the small, windowless lab that had been my home for the last 5 years, my mind drifted back. It wasn't the first time I'd been dismissed. In fact, being invisible was the only role I had ever known in the family. I remember my high school graduation, or rather, I remember Wyatt's graduation from college 4 years prior. That day, the backyard was filled with catered food, a live jazz band, and half the town's elite. Dad stood on the patio, a microphone in hand, beaming like he'd just won the lottery. To my son, Wyatt, he had bellowed, raising a glass of expensive scotch. Graduating with a business degree, ready to take the reins of the empire. A man of action. Everyone cheered. Then, Dad pointed to the driveway. A massive red ribbon sat atop a brand new BMW M3. Wyatt screamed like a banshee, running over to hug the car. Then Dad. It was the perfect picture of success. Fast forward 4 years. My high school graduation. I was valedictorian. I had a full ride to pre-med. We went to a steakhouse. Just the 4 of us. No band. No party. Dad handed me a small, wrapped box across the table. I remember feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe he finally saw me. I opened it. Inside was a fountain pen. It's a Mont Blanc, Dad said, cutting into his steak. Use it to sign your student loan papers. I'm not paying for medical school, Julian. If you want to be a doctor, you pay for it. The business doesn't support hobbies. A hobby? I had asked, staring at the pen. Saving lives is a hobby? It is when it doesn't generate profit, Dad replied without looking up. Wyatt is bringing in clients. You're just going to be racking up debt. That's your choice. But don't expect a handout. That was the deal. Wyatt got the car, the tuition, the fast track to the executive suite. I got a pen and a mountain of debt. For the next 8 years, I became a ghost. While Wyatt was posting photos of bottle service in Miami and ski trips in Aspen, I was working the night shift at the campus library to pay for textbooks. I was eating instant oatmeal 3 times a day. I missed Thanksgiving because I couldn't afford the flight home. I missed Christmas because I was running cultures in the lab that couldn't be left unattended. I remember one specific night in my 2nd year of my PhD. I was working as a bartender on weekends to cover my rent. Dad and Wyatt came in. They didn't see me at first. They were with a group of investors, loud and boisterous. I tried to switch stations to go to the back, but the manager yelled at me to cover the VIP table. I had to walk over. Here's to the acquisition, Dad shouted, raising his glass. Then he saw me. He froze. He looked at my black vest, the bar towel over my shoulder. Julian, he said. The table went quiet. Wyatt looked at me and burst out laughing. Oh man, is this the residency? Specialized in mixology? The investors laughed nervously. Dad's face turned crimson. Not out of sympathy, but out of embarrassment. Get us another round, Dad said, his voice like ice. And keep the change. You look like you need it. He threw a $100 bill on the tray. He didn't look me in the eye. I took the money. I had to. My electric bill was overdue. That night, I cried in the walk-in freezer for 10 minutes, then washed my face and finished my shift. But there was something else driving me. Something stronger than their hate. It was Toby. Toby was a patient I met during my rotations. 7 years old. He had the brightest blue eyes you've ever seen, and a laugh that could make you forget you were in a hospice ward. He had a rare neurodegenerative condition. It was eating away at his nervous system. There was no cure, no treatment, just management. I sat with Toby's parents when he passed away. I watched the light go out of their eyes. I watched his father hold his small, lifeless hand and beg God for a miracle that never came. That night I made a promise. Not to my dad, not to Wyatt, but to Toby. I promised I would find a way to stop it. So when Dad threatened my inheritance, it didn't sting the way he thought it would. I didn't care about his money. I didn't care about the summer house or the country club membership. I cared about the protein sequence I had isolated 3 weeks ago. I cared about the fact that for the first time in history, we had reversed the degradation in the test subjects. I was fighting a war against death itself. They were playing golf. As I drove back to the city, passing the luxury car dealerships where Wyatt leased his self-worth, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. Let them have their golf game. Let them have their jokes. Because tomorrow I wasn't just going to present a paper. I was going to drop a nuclear bomb on the medical world. And whether they liked it or not, the shockwave was going to hit them right on the fairway. I pulled into the parking lot of the research center. Elena was waiting at the door, holding a tablet. She looked terrified and exhilarated all at once. The press list just updated, she said as I got out of the car. CNBC is coming. Reuters. The medical journal. Julian, the rumor leaked. People know something is happening. Good, I said, grabbing my lab coat from the back seat. Let them come. And one more thing, Elena said, hesitating. Mr. Sterling's office called. I stopped. Sterling? The billionaire. Yeah. Apparently he has a personal interest in the field. His assistant asked for a copy of the abstract. Did you send it? I sent it an hour ago. I smiled. A real, genuine smile. My father was spending his Friday trying to chase Sterling down on a golf course to sell him a strip mall. Meanwhile, Sterling was already reading my work. Perfect, I said. Let's get to work. Friday arrived with a cloudless blue sky, perfect for golf, and perfect for the day my life would change forever. While I was double-checking the AV equipment in the auditorium, my father and brother were pulling into the exclusive valet lot at the Oaks Country Club. I know this because Wyatt, true to form, posted a story on Instagram. Closing deals on the green. Big things coming. #hustle, #empire. The photo showed his view from the golf cart. A pristine fairway, his freshly polished shoes, and in the distance, a group of 4 men teeing off. I could picture the scene perfectly. I knew how my father operated. Robert was a shark, or at least he thought he was. He was wearing his lucky navy polo, the one he wore whenever he needed to intimidate someone. He was standing by the cart watching the group ahead. That's him, Dad whispered to Wyatt, nodding toward the tall, silver-haired man in the group ahead, Mr. Arthur Sterling. Sterling was a legend. He wasn't just rich. He was changed the GDP of a small country rich. He made his fortune in tech, then diversified into everything from aerospace to biotech. But he was notoriously private. Getting a meeting with him was harder than getting an audience with the Pope. Remember the plan, Dad hissed. We don't pitch him on the first hole. We let him play. We compliment his swing. We wait for the turn at the 9th hole to bring up the redevelopment project. I got it, Dad, Wyatt said, adjusting his glove. I've been practicing my drive. I'm gonna crush it today. But Wyatt was sweating. I knew my brother. He was all flash, no substance. And right now he was desperate. What Dad didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Wyatt was in deep trouble. He had leveraged his own portfolio into some shady crypto investments 6 months ago. They had tanked. He was upside down on his condo, his car lease was 3 months behind, and he had borrowed from the company escrow account to cover the margin calls. He needed this deal with Sterling to replace the money before the quarterly audit next week. If he didn't close this, he wasn't just broke. He was going to prison. The round began. Dad and Wyatt played the part of the perfect gentleman. They clapped when Sterling sank a putt. They laughed at his jokes. They kept their distance, hovering like vultures waiting for a carcass. By the fifth hole, the group ahead slowed down. Sterling was on his phone. He looked distracted. He was pacing by the sand trap, typing furiously. Dad saw his opening. He walked over, casual-like, holding a bottle of water. "Mr. Sterling," Dad said, putting on his best charm. "Robert Harrison. Harrison Development. We met briefly at the charity gala last year." Sterling looked up. His eyes were tired. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, not a man enjoying a Friday off. "Harrison," Sterling repeated, vague recognition in his eyes. "Right? Real estate." "Exactly," Dad said, signaling for Wyatt to come over. "This is my son, Wyatt, VP of Sales. We're actually working on a prime commercial revitalization downtown. I'd love to get your thoughts on it if you have a moment." Sterling sighed, checking his watch. "I'm a bit preoccupied today, Harrison. Waiting on some news." "Bad market news?" Wyatt chimed in, trying to sound knowledgeable. "The Asian markets are volatile right now, right?" Sterling looked at Wyatt with a mix of pity and annoyance. "No. Personal news." "Well," Dad said, pivoting quickly, "family is everything, isn't it? That's what I tell my boys. Wyatt here has been my right hand for 10 years. Sharpest mind in the business. Unlike my other son. I wasn't there, but I know he said it." Dad couldn't help himself. He used me as a foil to make Wyatt look better. It was his favorite sales tactic. "I have a winner son and a loser son. I'm presenting you the winner." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "You have another son?" "Julian," Dad scoffed, waving his hand as if swatting a fly. "The black sheep. He's a dreamer. Went into medicine, if you can believe it. Research. Thinks he's going to cure the world." Sterling froze. His hand tightened on his putter. "Research? Yeah. Plays with test tubes." Wyatt laughed, sensing an opportunity to bond. "He actually invited us to some presentation today. Can you imagine? We're here trying to build the future of the city, and he wants us to watch him talk about bacteria." Dad told him straight, "Nobody cares about that stuff." Sterling stared at Wyatt. The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "He said nobody cares?" Sterling asked, his voice low. "Waste of time," Dad confirmed confidently. "I told him, get a real job, generate some revenue. But you know how these academics are. Head in the clouds." Sterling didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He looked at his phone again. It buzzed. "Excuse me," Sterling said abruptly. He walked away from them toward his golf cart. "I think you got him, Dad," Wyatt whispered. "He's thinking about it. He sees we're serious men." "He's aloof," Dad muttered. "That's how billionaires are. We'll nail him at the clubhouse. Once he has a drink in him, he'll sign the letter of intent." Back at the lab, the auditorium was filling up. And I mean filling up. I peeked through the curtain. There were cameras. Lots of them. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. There were representatives from Pfizer, Moderna, Merck. The buzz in the room was electric. It was a low hum of anticipation. Elena walked up behind me. She fixed my tie. "You ready?" she asked. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Good," she said. "Use it. Remember Toby. Every day. Then go out there and tell them." I checked my phone one last time. No texts from Dad. No texts from Wyatt. Not even a good luck from Mom. She was probably at the spa, keeping her phone off to avoid Dad's temper. I was alone, but looking out at that sea of expectant faces, seeing the scientific community waiting to hear what I had to say, I realized I wasn't alone at all. I was part of something much bigger than the Harrison family legacy. I stepped out from behind the curtain. The room went silent. The lights hit me. I walked to the podium. I placed my notes down. My hands were shaking, just a little. "Good afternoon," I said into the microphone. My voice echoed through the hall. "My name is Dr. Julian Harrison, and today, I am going to show you how we just ended a death sentence." At that exact moment, 5 miles away, Wyatt was ordering a bottle of Dom Perignon at the Clubhouse bar, putting it on a credit card that was maxed out, confident that he was about to become rich. The irony was about to hit them like a freight train. The clubhouse at the Oaks was a sanctuary of polished brass, velvet upholstery, and the soft clinking of crystal glasses. It was a place designed to make people feel important. Dad and Wyatt had secured a prime table near the bar, right in the line of sight of Mr. Sterling's table. Sterling was sitting with his group, but he wasn't drinking. He was staring at the large flat-screen TV mounted above the bar, which was currently muted and playing ESPN highlights. "Look at him," Wyatt whispered, pouring the champagne. "He's watching us. He's gauging us." "Just act natural," Dad said, sipping his scotch. "We look successful. We look relaxed. Wealth attracts wealth." Wyatt took a massive gulp of champagne. "I need this, Dad. Seriously. The crypto thing. It's messy." Dad glared at him. "I told you to fix it. If Sterling signs, the commission alone covers your mess. Just keep smiling." Meanwhile, I was 70 slides into my presentation. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I was showing the brain scans. "As you can see in Figure A," I said, pointing to the massive screen behind me, "the neural pathways are degraded. This is the standard progression of the disease at stage 4. Total loss of motor function. Cognitive decline. Death usually follows within 3 months." I clicked the remote. The slide changed. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. "This is Figure B," I said, my voice gaining strength. "This is the same patient. 6 weeks after the introduction of our synthetic enzyme protocol." The image showed bright, vibrant neural pathways. Regrowth, activity, life. "We didn't just stop the degradation," I said, looking directly into the camera lens. "We reversed it." Flashes went off like a strobe light. A reporter in the front row stood up, ignoring protocol. "Dr. Harrison, are you saying this is a functional cure?" "I'm saying—" I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "That for the first time, a diagnosis is not a funeral arrangement. It is a treatable condition." Back at the clubhouse, the atmosphere shifted. The bartender, a guy named Mike who I went to high school with, grabbed the remote. "Hey, can you turn that up?" A voice called out from the back of the bar. Breaking news banner just popped up. Wyatt rolled his eyes. Probably some political scandal. Who cares? "Hey, Mike, another bottle over here." But Mike didn't move. He pointed the remote at the TV and unmuted it. The ESPN highlights vanished. The screen turned a bright, urgent crimson. The words "breaking news" pulsed on the screen. The anchor's voice cut through the chatter of the clubhouse. "We are interrupting our scheduled programming for a major medical announcement coming out of the National Research Center. Reports are confirming a historic breakthrough in the treatment of neurodegenerative syndrome, or NDS." At Sterling's table, the billionaire stopped breathing. He stood up slowly, his eyes locked on the screen. "NDS," Dad muttered, frowning. "Wait, isn't that what Julian was rambling about?" Wyatt scoffed. "Yeah, right. Like Julian is going to be on CNN. He's probably in a basement somewhere washing beakers." Then the camera on the TV cut to the podium. There I was. I looked older on TV. The lights cast shadows on my face, making me look serious, authoritative. I wasn't the little brother anymore. I was Dr. Harrison. "This discovery," my voice on the TV said, "is dedicated to Toby, and to every family who has been told there is no hope. Today we give you hope." The clubhouse went silent. Dead silent. Wyatt's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. "Is that—" Wyatt stammered. "Is that Julian?" Dad lowered his scotch. His mouth opened slightly. "That's him." "What is he doing?" Wyatt asked, his voice rising in pitch. "Why are there so many microphones?" On the screen, the news anchor appeared in a split screen. Joining us live is Dr. Julian Harrison. Doctor, experts are calling this the most significant discovery since penicillin. Can you tell us about the valuation of this patent? The patent? TVMe replied, I'm not concerned with the valuation. The patent is being filed open source for developing nations. But the pharmaceutical licensing for the U.S. market, analysts are projecting the initial IPO of our startup to be in the range of $3 billion. $3 billion. The words hung in the air of the country club like smoke. Wyatt choked. He literally choked on his champagne. He started coughing violently, hacking and sputtering. Dad dropped his glass. It hit the table but didn't break. It just tipped over, spilling 18-year-old scotch all over his beige trousers. He didn't even notice the cold liquid soaking his leg. $3 billion, Dad whispered. He owns the patent? He said open source. Wyatt wheezed, wiping his mouth. He's giving it away. No, you idiot, Dad hissed, his eyes glued to the screen. He said for developing nations. The U.S. market, the IPO. Dad's brain was misfiring. He was trying to calculate 30% of $3 billion. He was trying to remember if he had legally disowned me yet, or if it was just a threat. But the real show wasn't at the Harrison table. It was at Sterling's table. Mr. Sterling was crying. Tears were streaming down the face of the toughest businessman in New York. He wasn't looking at the stock ticker. He was looking at me. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. He dialed a number. Dad saw this. He saw Sterling crying. He saw the news. And his narcissism kicked in. He saw an angle. He's watching Julian, Dad said, standing up. He knows Julian is my son. This is it. This is the connection. Dad, what are you doing? Wyatt asked, panic in his eyes. I'm going to seal the deal, Dad said, buttoning his jacket. I'm the father of the genius. He needs to know that. Dad started walking toward Sterling. He had no idea he was walking into a minefield. The distance between my father's table and Mr. Sterling's table was only about 20 feet. But in that moment, it felt like a walk across a tightrope. On the TV screen above them, the interview continued. Dr. Harrison, the reporter asked, you mentioned you've been working on this for 5 years with very little funding. How did you manage? I watched myself on the screen answer the question that would seal my family's fate. It wasn't easy, TV Julian said. I worked 3 jobs. I bartended. I didn't have family support. In fact, my family encouraged me to quit. They told me I was wasting my time. They told me nobody cared about my work. At the clubhouse, Dad froze mid-step. The entire room turned to look at him. These were his peers, his golf buddies, the people he had bragged to for years about his winner son Wyatt. They had all heard him trash Julian not 2 hours ago. They actually declined to be here today, TV Julian continued. They had a tea time, but that's okay, because this isn't for them. This is for the people who need it. Dad turned pale. He looked like a ghost. He looked around the room, seeing the judgment in the eyes of the other members. But he was committed. He was Robert Harrison. He could spin anything. He reached Sterling's table just as Sterling hung up the phone. Mr. Sterling, Dad boomed, his voice too loud, too fake. Incredible news, isn't it? That's my boy. That's my Julian on the screen. Chip off the old block. Sterling slowly turned to face him. His eyes were red from crying, but his expression was stone cold. It was the look of a predator looking at prey. Your boy? Sterling asked quietly. Yes, Julian. Dad laughed nervously, clapping his hands together. Always was the quiet one, but I knew he had it in him. I pushed him, you know? Tough love. Made him the man he is. Anyway, seeing as how our families are practically connected now, about that downtown deal. Sterling stood up. He was a tall man, towering over my father. Mr. Harrison, Sterling said, his voice carrying through the silent bar. Do you know why I was checking my phone all day? Business? The Asian markets. Dad guessed, sweating. My granddaughter, Sterling said. Sophie. She's 4 years old. She was diagnosed with NDS 6 months ago. Dad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I have spent millions trying to find a cure, Sterling continued, stepping closer to Dad. I have flown her to specialists in Switzerland, Japan, Israel. Everyone told me to prepare for the end. Sterling pointed a shaking finger at the TV screen, where my face was still beaming. Your son, Sterling said, his voice cracking with emotion, just saved my granddaughter's life. Well, that's wonderful, Dad stammered. See? I told you. We Harrisons, we deliver. You told me? Sterling cut him off, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. That he was a waste of time. You told me nobody cares about his lab rats. You mocked him. You told me you advised him to get a real job. I was joking, Dad said, holding up his hands. It was just golf talk. I don't find it funny, Sterling said. Then, Sterling turned to look at Wyatt, who was cowering at the table, trying to make himself invisible. And you, Sterling said to Wyatt. You laughed. You said he was playing with bacteria. Mr. Sterling, please, Wyatt squeaked. We're proud of him. Really. Sterling reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once. I just got off the phone with my chief investment officer, Sterling said. I instructed him to liquidate every holding I have in Harrison Development. Dad grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. Mr. Sterling, that's 40% of our capital backing. You can't just... I can, Sterling said. And I just did. I don't do business with men who don't know the value of gold when it's right in front of them. You two are bankrupt, morally and, as of 5 minutes ago, financially. Sterling turned his back on them. He looked up at the TV screen one last time, whispered thank you, Dr. Harrison, and walked out of the clubhouse. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Dad stood there, alone in the center of the room. He looked at the TV. He looked at me, the son he had thrown away. Then his phone started ringing. Then Wyatt's phone. Then Dad's again. It was a cacophony of ringtones. Dad? Wyatt whispered, looking at his screen. It's the bank. They're calling about the margin call. Dad, Wyatt said again, his voice trembling. It's the investors. They saw the news ticker. Sterling pulled out. The stock is plummeting. Dad didn't answer. He just stared at the TV. I had finished my speech. The crowd on the screen was giving me a standing ovation. People were cheering. I looked happy. I looked free. Dad slumped into a chair. He looked old. For the first time in his life, the shark had no teeth. I didn't know any of this was happening, of course. I was standing in the hallway of the research center, surrounded by reporters. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. One text message. From Mom. Julian. Please call home. Dad is having chest pains. Wyatt is crying. What did you do? I looked at the text. I thought about the invite they threw on the floor. I thought about the pen. I thought about the lab rats. I typed a reply. I didn't do anything, Mom. I just went to work. I'm busy saving lives. I'll call you when I'm free. Might be a while. I put the phone away. Dr. Harrison? A reporter from the New York Times asked. What's next for you? I smiled. Next? I'm going to buy my own golf course. And I'm going to turn it into a park for kids. The next 48 hours were a blur of adrenaline and vindication. I barely slept, but I didn't feel tired. I was fueled by the realization that the dynamic of my entire existence had shifted. The gravity had changed. I was no longer the moon orbiting their planet. I was the sun, and they were burning up. While I was doing interviews with Anderson Cooper and meeting with the FDA to fast-track the distribution protocols, my family's world was dismantling itself brick by brick. I learned the details later, mostly through voicemails and the grapevine of our small, gossip-hungry town. After Sterling walked out of the clubhouse, the fallout was immediate. The Harrison Development stock didn't just dip. It crashed. Sterling's exit was a signal flare to every other investor that the ship was sinking. Dad tried to do damage control from the clubhouse lobby. He was shouting into his phone, threatening bankers, begging partners. But nobody wants to bet on a horse that Arthur Sterling just shot. And then there was Wyatt. Wyatt, the golden child. I was sitting in my new temporary office provided by the hospital administration when my personal phone rang. It was an unknown number. Usually I wouldn't answer, but I was expecting calls from potential manufacturing partners. Dr. Harrison speaking, I said. Julian? It's me, Wyatt. His voice was unrecognizable. The arrogance, the swagger, it was all gone. He sounded like a frightened child. What do you want, Wyatt? I asked, typing on my laptop while I talked. I have a meeting with the Surgeon General in 10 minutes. Julian, you have to help me, Wyatt whispered. He sounded like he was crying. They're going to take the condo. They're taking the car. I owe people money, Julian. Bad people. The crypto, I guessed. How did you? Never mind. Yes. I borrowed from the company escrow. Dad doesn't know. If the audit happens on Monday, I'm going to jail for embezzlement. Julian, please. I need a loan. Just until I get back on my feet. You're rich now, right? 3 billion. Just give me 100 grand. I'll pay you back double. I stopped typing. I leaned back in my chair. You want a loan? I repeated. Yes, please. We're brothers, Jules. Blood. Blood, I said. Right? Like the blood you told me to go check the couch cushions for? I was joking. You know I was joking. I don't think you were, Wyatt. I think you truly believed I was beneath you. You believed I was worthless because I didn't drive a Porsche. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear? I'm begging you. Wyatt, I said, my voice calm. Do you remember when I needed tuition money? Do you remember what you said? You said, sink or swim. That's how the real world works. Julian, don't do this. I'm not doing anything. I'm letting you swim. You're a businessman, Wyatt. Figure it out. Sell the clubs. Sell the watch. Sell the arrogance. You'll be amazed how much cash you can raise when you strip away the ego. Dad will kill me, Wyatt screamed. Dad has his own problems, I said. Good luck, Wyatt. I hung up. Felt cold. But it also felt necessary. Enabling him would only delay the inevitable. He needed to hit the bottom to realize he wasn't made of gold. 2 hours later, my assistant knocked on the door. Dr. Harrison? There's a Mr. Sterling here to see you. My heart jumped. Send him in. Arthur Sterling walked in. He looked different than the photos. He looked humble. He didn't offer a handshake. He walked right up to me and pulled me into a hug. A real bear hug. Thank you, he whispered. Sophie. She's responding to the first dose. The doctors say the tremors have stopped. I'm glad, Mr. Sterling, I said, patting his back awkwardly. He pulled away, wiping his eyes. Please call me Arthur. And I wanted to tell you personally, I handled your father. Handled? I pulled my funding. I assume you know that. But I also made a few calls to the country club board and the Chamber of Commerce. I told them exactly what kind of man dismisses a life-saving miracle because it interferes with his tea time. I sighed. You didn't have to do that. I did, Arthur said firmly. Men like that, they only understand power. You took away his argument. I took away his audience. He's finished in this town, Julian. Arthur paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a checkbook. Now, Arthur said, I know the IPO is coming, but I want to be the first investor. I want to fund the pediatric wing of your new institute. Name your price. I looked at the checkbook. I thought about the real money Dad worshipped. Arthur, I said, keep your money. He looked confused. Excuse me? The institute is fully funded by the grants, I explained. But if you want to help, there's a student loan program I want to start. For kids who have the grades but not the parents to support them. Kids who get given pens instead of tuition. Arthur smiled. Done. How much? All of it, I said. I want to make sure no brilliant mind ever has to work the night shift at a bar when they should be studying. Consider it done, Arthur said, shaking my hand. You're a better man than your father, Julian. A much better man. That evening I drove home. Not to my apartment but to the estate. I needed to get my things. My old books. The few sentimental items I had left in the attic. When I pulled up, the house looked different. The lights were off. The fountain was turned off. It looked like a mausoleum. I walked in. Dad was sitting in the dark in the living room, a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't look at me. Wyatt confessed, Dad said, his voice slurring slightly. Embezzlement. He's going to prison. My lawyer says we can't stop it. I heard, I said. And the business? It's gone. Sterling blacklisted me. The bank called the loans. I know. Dad finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked small. You planned this, he accused. You timed it. I laughed. A short, dry laugh. Dad, I said. I invited you. I begged you to come. I wanted you to be part of it. I wanted you to stand next to me. You chose the golf course. You chose to mock me to Sterling. You did this to yourself. Dad stared at me, looking for a way to blame me, to make me the villain. But he couldn't find it. The truth was too bright. I'm taking my things, I said. And then I'm leaving. Mom is welcome to call me. You? Don't bother. I walked up the stairs. I packed a single box. As I walked back down, I passed the junk drawer in the hallway, the one where he used to throw my awards. I opened it. There, amidst the old batteries and rubber bands, was that fountain pen, the Mont Blanc. I took it out. I walked into the living room and placed the pen on the table next to his scotch. Here, I said. You can use this to sign the bankruptcy papers. I walked out of the house. The air outside was fresh. The stars were out. I got into my Honda Civic. It still rattled. Still leaked oil. But as I drove down the driveway, leaving the crumbling empire behind me, I felt like I was driving a rocket ship. I was free. The silence I expected after walking out of my father's house didn't last long. In fact, it lasted exactly 12 hours. By the next morning, the silence was replaced by a cacophony of noise, so loud it felt like the entire world was screaming at my door. But this time, the noise wasn't coming from me trying to be heard. It was coming from everyone who had ignored me, suddenly realizing I was the only lifeboat on their sinking ship. It started with the media. You have to understand the news cycle in America. It loves a hero, but it loves a villain even more. And my father, in his infinite arrogance, decided to volunteer for the role. 3 days after the announcement, I was sitting in a conference room at the hospital, reviewing the blueprints for the new research wing Arthur Sterling was funding. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, walked in and turned on the TV without saying a word. You need to see this, Julian, she said. It was a morning talk show, local but with a wide reach. And there, sitting on the beige couch, was Robert Harrison. He looked tired. The bags under his eyes were heavy, and his suit, usually impeccable, looked slightly ill-fitting, like he had lost weight overnight. But he was smiling, that practiced, shark-like smile I knew so well. So, Mr. Harrison, the host asked, leaning in, your son, Dr. Julian Harrison, is being hailed as the modern Salk. The Sterling Institute just announced a $100 million endowment in his name. You must be incredibly proud. Proud doesn't even cover it, Diane, Dad said, his voice smooth as silk. You know, raising a genius isn't easy. It requires a specific kind of guidance, tough love. I always told Julian that the world wouldn't hand him anything. I had to push him. I had to make him hungry. If I had coddled him, if I had given him everything like other parents do, he never would have developed the grit to find this cure. In a way, his success is a testament to the Harrison family values. I stared at the screen, my coffee turning cold in my hand. The audacity was breathtaking. He was rewriting history in real time. He was turning his neglect into a strategy. He was claiming credit for the scars he gave me. That is, An interesting perspective, the host said. She paused, looking at her notes. Because we have a source, a former classmate of Julian's, who claims that you didn't attend his high school graduation dinner, and that you referred to his medical degree as a hobby at a Rotary Club meeting last month. Dad's smile faltered, just for a microsecond, a twitch in his left eye. Well, Diane, context is everything, Dad stammered. Humor is a big part of our family dynamic. We banter. We challenge each other. And the golf tournament? The host pressed. Reports say you were at the Sterling Invitational on the day of his announcement. That Mr. Sterling actually fired your firm on the spot because you mocked Julian's work. Dad shifted in his seat. He looked like a trapped animal. Business is complex, he said, his voice rising. Mr. Sterling and I had a creative difference. But let's focus on Julian. I'm just happy I could provide the foundation for him to soar. In fact, I'm planning a gala in his honor next week. A homecoming. I turned off the TV. He's planning a gala? Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. Does he know you're not speaking to him? He knows, I said. He just doesn't believe it. He thinks I'm still the boy who wants his approval. He thinks if he throws a party, I'll come running back to show off my trophy. What are you going to do? I'm going to get back to work, I said. And Sarah? If he calls, tell him I'm busy playing with my lab rats. But the assaults on my piece didn't stop with the media. The next wave came from the one person I thought might actually care about me. My mother. 2 days later, I was in the temporary lab. Security called up to say my mother was in the lobby. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell them to send her away. But she was my mother. The woman who used to sneak me extra dessert when Dad wasn't looking. The woman who would squeeze my hand under the table when Wyatt was being cruel. I told them to send her up. When Linda Harrison walked into my lab, she looked out of place. She was wearing a Chanel suit and carrying a Tupperware container. She looked around at the gleaming equipment, the bustling researchers, the hum of serious work, with a mix of awe and fear. Julian, she said softly. Mom. She walked over and placed the Tupperware on my desk. I made your favorite, lasagna. I know you're probably not eating right. It was a classic move. Food as an apology. Food as a bridge. Thanks, Mom, I said, not touching it. What are you doing here? I wanted to see you, she said, clutching her purse. You haven't answered my texts. Your father is... He's a wreck, Julian. He sits in the study all day with the lights off. He's drinking too much. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. I didn't want him to suffer. I just wanted him to not exist in my world. He's sorry, Mom said. He is. He has a terrible way of showing it, you know that. But he loves you. We both do. I leaned back in my chair. Mom, he went on TV yesterday and took credit for my work. He lied to millions of people. That's not love. That's marketing. He's trying to save the family name, Mom pleaded. People are saying terrible things online. They're calling us monsters. We can't go to the club. My friends aren't returning my calls. Wyatt is... Julian. Wyatt is in serious trouble. I know, I said. He called me. He wanted money. He's your brother? Mom said, tears welling up in her eyes. If he goes to prison, it will destroy him. He's not strong like you. He's fragile. I laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. Fragile? I asked. Mom, for 30 years, I was the one you all called weak. Wyatt was the golden child. He was the shark. He was the future. Now that he broke the law, suddenly he's fragile? Suddenly I'm the strong one. Please, she whispered. Just a statement. Just tell the press that we supported you. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. If you do that, the investors might come back. Mr. Sterling might reconsider. You have so much power now, Julian. You can fix this. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had watched her husband belittle me for decades and said nothing. The woman who had watched her eldest son bully me and called it boys being boys. She wasn't here to see me. She was here to fix the image. She was here to restore the comfort of her life. I can't fix it, Mom, I said gently. Because it's not broken. It's finally clear. What does that mean? It means I'm not going to lie for you. I'm not going to bail Wyatt out of the consequences of his own greed. And I'm certainly not going to help Dad pretend he was a good father. So you're just going to let us drown? She asked, her voice turning hard. The sweetness vanished, replaced by the same coldness I saw in my father. I'm not drowning you, I said. I'm just refusing to be your life raft anymore. You're on the shore, Mom. You can walk away from him. You can choose to be a different person. But as long as you're standing next to him, defending him, asking me to sacrifice my integrity for his ego, I can't help you. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her purse. She didn't look back at the lasagna. You've changed, she said bitterly. Success has made you cold. No, Mom, I said as she walked to the door. Success just made me safe enough to tell the truth. She left. I threw the lasagna in the trash. Couldn't eat it. Tasted like guilt. The final blow to the House of Harrison came a week later. And it wasn't quiet. I was at a fundraising dinner with Arthur Sterling. We were celebrating the groundbreaking of the new pediatric center. The mood was high. I was wearing a tuxedo that Arthur's tailor had fitted for me. For the first time in my life, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't see a scrawny, tired kid. I saw a man. Midway through the dinner, my phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Breaking: Wyatt Harrison, VP of Harrison Development, arrested on federal fraud charges. There was a video attached. It was shot from a helicopter. It showed the driveway of my parents' estate. Police cruisers with flashing lights surrounded the fountain. I watched as 2 officers led Wyatt out of the front door. He wasn't wearing his designer suit. He was wearing sweatpants. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He looked small. He looked terrified. And then the camera panned to the doorway. My father was standing there. He wasn't fighting the police. He wasn't yelling. He was just watching. He held a glass of scotch in one hand, leaning against the doorframe, watching his golden child get hauled away into the back of a squad car. He didn't move to help. He didn't run after him. He just watched, detached, as if he were watching a bad investment depreciate. Arthur leaned over and looked at my phone. He sighed. It's a tragedy, Arthur said quietly, but it's a tragedy of their own making. I should feel happy, I whispered. I should feel vindicated. He tormented me my whole life. He stole from me. He mocked me. But you don't feel happy, Arthur said. No, I feel pity. That's because you're a healer, Julian, Arthur said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You fix things. You don't destroy them. That's the difference between you and your father. He consumes. You create. I turned off the phone. You're right, I said. I have work to do. I stood up and walked to the podium to give my speech. I didn't mention my family. I didn't mention the arrest. I spoke about the future. I spoke about the kids we were going to save. But in the back of my mind, I knew the chapter was finally closed. The Harrison Empire had fallen. Not by a sword, but by the weight of its own lies. And I was the only one left standing among the rubble, holding a lantern to light the way for someone else. 1 year later, the seasons had changed, and so had everything else. The grand opening of the Sophie Sterling Pediatric Research Center was the event of the year in New York. The building was a marvel of glass and steel, filled with natural light and color. I had insisted on the design. I didn't want it to look like a hospital. I wanted it to look like a playground. I stood in the lobby watching the guests arrive. The best doctors in the world were here, politicians, philanthropists, and running through the crowd, laughing and chasing a balloon, was Sophie Sterling. She was 5 years old now. Her movements were fluid. Her laugh was clear. A year ago, she couldn't hold a spoon. Today, she was a hurricane of energy. Arthur walked up to me, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. She's fast, Arthur laughed, watching his granddaughter. I can't keep up with her anymore. That's the side effect we were hoping for. I smiled, taking the glass. You did this, Julian, Arthur said, his voice serious. Look around. This building. These people. Sophie. You did this. We did this. I corrected him. You gave me the platform. I gave you money, Arthur said. Money is cheap. Vision is rare. By the way, I have a surprise for you. He pointed toward the entrance. Walking through the doors wasn't a celebrity or a dignitary. It was a group of 20 young adults. They looked nervous, looking around the fancy lobby with wide eyes. They were diverse from all different backgrounds. Some wore suits that didn't quite fit. Others wore their Sunday best. Who are they? I asked. The first class of the Julian Harrison Scholarship, Arthur said. Full ride. Medical school, housing, living stipend. And no need for night shifts at a bar. I felt a lump in my throat. I walked over to them. A young woman in the front stepped forward. She looked about 18, clutching a backpack. Dr. Harrison? She asked, her voice shaking. I'm Maya. I read your paper on neuroplasticity in high school. You're the reason I want to be a neurologist. I looked at Maya. I saw myself. I saw the hunger. I saw the fear of not being good enough. It's nice to meet you, Maya, I said, shaking her hand. Welcome to the team. Later that afternoon, I needed a moment of air. I stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the city. The wind was cold, reminding me of that morning I drove away from my parents' house. I saw a man sitting on a bench in the park across the street. He was feeding pigeons. He wore a heavy coat and a hat pulled low. I squinted. There was something familiar about the posture, the slump of the shoulders. It was my father. I hadn't seen him since the arrest video. Wyatt was currently serving a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility upstate. The estate had been sold to pay off the creditors and the legal fees. Mom had moved to a small condo in Florida to be near her sister, finally putting distance between herself and the wreckage. But Dad stayed. I walked across the street. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see him one last time with my own eyes, not through a screen. I stopped a few feet away from the bench. He looked up. He looked old. Not just aged, but defeated. The arrogance that had fueled him for decades had evaporated, leaving behind a bitter, hollow shell. Julian, he said. His voice was raspy. Hello, Dad. He looked at my suit. He looked at the gleaming building across the street with my name on the plaque. You did well, he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact, tinged with confusion. He still couldn't understand how the equation had changed, how the variables he controlled had stopped working. I did, I said. Wyatt calls me once a week, Dad said, throwing a piece of bread to a pigeon. He blames me, says I put too much pressure on him. He's not wrong, I said. I wanted the best for you boys, Dad muttered. I wanted you to be winners. The world eats losers, Julian. I was trying to protect you. No, Dad, I said, stepping closer. You weren't trying to protect us. You were trying to project yourself. You used Wyatt as a mirror to admire yourself, and you used me as a trash can to dump your insecurities. You didn't raise us. You invested in us. And when the returns didn't look right, you panicked. He flinched. The truth hit him harder than any insult could. I lost everything, he whispered. The house, the firm, your mother. She doesn't call. You have what you built, I said. This is it. This solitude. This is the legacy you worked so hard for. You pushed everyone away because you thought you were above them. Now you're alone. He looked at me, his eyes wet. For a second, I thought he might apologize. I thought he might say the words I had waited 30 years to hear. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm proud of you. He opened his mouth. Do you have a few dollars? He asked. My pension check doesn't come until Tuesday. I stared at him. Even now, even at the bottom of the barrel, it was about transaction. It was about extraction. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my wallet. I didn't give him cash. I pulled out a card. This is the number for a counselor, I said, placing the card on the bench next to him, and the address for a job placement center. They help seniors find purpose. I don't need a job, he scoffed, a flicker of the old Robert appearing. I'm a CEO. You were a CEO? I said firmly. Now you're just a man on a bench. Good luck, Robert. I turned around. Julian, he called out. You're just going to walk away? I'm your father. I stopped. I looked back at him, and I finally realized the cure I had been searching for wasn't just in the lab. I know, I said, and that's the only reason I stopped to talk to you at all. Goodbye. I walked back across the street, toward the institute, toward Maya and the students, toward Arthur and Sophie, toward my family, because that's what I learned. Family isn't the blood that runs in your veins. It's the people who bet on you when you're broke. It's the people who stand by you when the world is laughing. It's the people who help you build, not the ones who demand you inherit their demolition. I walked into the lobby, and the warmth of the building wrapped around me. I saw Elena waving at me from the balcony. I saw the future. My degree wasn't useless. My life wasn't a waste. And as for the junk drawer where my father had tried to bury my achievements, I had emptied it, and I had filled the world with light instead. We often grow up believing that our worth is tied to the approval of the people who raised us. We spend decades trying to twist ourselves into shapes that will fit their expectations, hoping that if we just achieve enough, earn enough, or become enough, they will finally see us. But this story teaches us a harsh but liberating truth. You cannot force someone to value you if they are committed to misunderstanding you. Julian's success didn't come from proving his father wrong. It came from proving himself right. The cure in this story wasn't just the medicine for the disease. It was the boundary Julian set with his toxic family. He learned that walking away from disrespect isn't an act of weakness. It's an act of supreme self-respect. Your lab rats, your passions, your quiet dreams, they matter. Don't let someone else's inability to see their value convince you to stop. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to succeed in spite of the people who should have supported you? Or maybe you've had to make the tough choice to distance yourself from family for your own peace. Comment good below if you believe that self-worth comes from within, not from approval. Or share your story of how you found your own Arthur Sterling, someone who saw your value when no one else did. Let's support each other in the comments.